Okay, I thought I'd do this video. In a way, it's sort of a remake of an old video of doing basic models. Just following someone made a comment on Facebook about they've been doing tutorials but were struggling where to go once they'd done the tutorials, not sort of thinking about how to move on doing something themselves. So the thing I did is I actually started out modelling some basic things that are literally around my room. These are two examples: bookcase and a storage unit. Nothing fancy, very easy to do, but it's more the process of actually making the model than the complexity of the model, because a lot of people sort of would make the mistake of doing these not sort of in a realistic fashion. So for example, I'm going to be using two add-ons, by the way. One's called Snapping Pies by Master Xeon, which is really useful when you want to be mucking about with your origin points, and the other one is called QBlocker, and both free, by the way. QBlocker is great because you can build, instead of just adding a cube, you can add a plain cube. So I can do that, and that puts the origin on the first polygon you created. Or you can add a corner cube, and that literally will create the origin point from the first point you click, which is very useful, especially when it comes to scaling. So if I scale on the X now, or on the Y, or on the Z, really useful for this sort of thing. Anywho, that's what I use. So some people would sort of say, okay, we'll just scale Z, do it something like that, and then they'd sort of go in. Always apply a scale, by the way. I just automatically do that, and they'd think, oh well, I want this. So what they'll do is they'll subdivide it. Well, once they've selected everything, they'll subdivide it. They'll take these faces, and then they'll press I twice, and then they'll E to inset it, and they'll say, well look, there's my thing. Well, immediately one thing jumps out here. The crossbars are twice as thick as the outer bars. So to fix that, you'll go in, you'll select these, scale them on the X by 0.5 to make them do the same with this, scale them on the Z by 0.5, and you see, there you go, there's your cube. Well, yeah, great, from a distance, that's fine. However, you've got a few issues with this. The most obvious one going to be when you start UVing it. If you want a wood texture on there, if you look where all your points are, that's going to be problematic in terms of getting a nice clean UV. And also, it's not realistic, because in the real world, these objects, as you can see here, they're made up of individual pieces. You know, each of these pieces is an individual unit, as it would be in the real world. So, how to do it? Well, you basically start off with one piece, and what I try to do is, if it's around the house, I'll get as many measurements off the actual object as I possibly can. Failing that, dive onto Google, go onto a site, find something that gives you the dimensions, and so you can work with that. So here, for example, we can see outer dimensions 61 centimeters by 29.5, inner 28.2. Now I just happen to know from having made so many of these things that most of these pieces are 15 millimeters thick. So that's what we start with. We start with one object, and you can add a cube, or you can use QBlocker. So let's just add a cube, assuming you don't want to use QBlocker at all. go up to items, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to say it's 15 millimeters thick, and we'll go with 0.3 of a meter by 0.3 of a meter, which is more or less like that. And I'll just apply rotation and scale on that, and there's my base unit, as it were. Now, to start with, we'll also add a sizer cube. So add a cube, and we know from these 0.61 by 0.61 by 0.295. Right, so 0.61 by 0.61 by 0.295. Right, there's our object. Again, apply the scale to that, and we know again that we want this subdivided because it's in 4, though we can alt click that, alt shift click and do a Control X, get rid of that loop, it's not really needed. Then, because this is a sizer cube, name it sizer cube. Right. And again here I would probably just select that and snap in pies, origin to selection, and then snap selection to cursor, and that puts it on the floor because it's just easier basically. Right, but what I would then do with this is go into the viewport visibility, so all edges wireframe, because I'm just using this for a reference. I don't want it to be obscuring what I'm doing. So let's just hide that lot. Oh, need to move those out of the work zone. Let's hide the work zone. Let's go into scene collection. Right, so we're going to start with this. Right, so I'm going to rotate that on the Y by 90, because I know that the sides are the ones that are the tallest. And oh, just hide those. That's something else you don't need to see. And then I'd literally just position it. I have snapping set up to be a combination of things, vertex and face. So I'll do a GX. Select the item, GX. Hold Control, snaps it to the. Just move it up a bit, and on GZ, so it snaps to the bottom, like that. And then we need to scale it up. So again, I'm going to edit mode, select that face mode, select it, GZ, snap. Right. And what I'll actually do is I think I'll select a point and I'll set that as the origin. So it's basically a corner cube. And again, I'm going to apply rotation to that because that's what I want it to be. Now, the temptation here is to start building, adding all the other bits, copying it and what have you, but it's actually going to be easier if you first UV this one item. So go into UV editing, I'm going to turn on sync, and I'm going to activate live unwrap, and I don't want that format for my UV for obvious reasons. That is all equal. Now on something like this, it isn't equal, so what I'll do is I'll switch to edge mode, and then I'll take edges and I'll mark them as a seam, so Control E, mark seam. I have that assigned to a shortcut, so from here on in I'm going to be using my shortcut. Hold on, let's put the that's not showing, presumably because I'm in a different view. Anyway, marking a seam, marking marking a seam. Seam, seam, seam. And you see that's much tidier, and it'll make more sense when it's UV'd. So what I'll do now is I'll then pull up Blender Kit. Again, a free add-on if you haven't got it, well worth having. I'll just put in wood. And look for a suitable wood. And this is the one I chose. And that will load that up. That isn't actually turned out the way I wanted it to anyway. Hide that. That's a shortcut key, it's the semicolon, but you can just click that icon to get rid of it. But that's actually turned out the way I want UV wise. If not, just select your UVs and rotate them. So we'll work with this now. So Shift D, X, snap it. Something about Blender Kit there gave me a stupid error, never mind. And so now Shift D, RY90, and again apply the rotation. I'll go back to items so we can see what we're up to. And this one we need to pull that one in. 3. I'll just GX. There we go. I'm going to Shift DZ. So there we are. There's your outer casing to start with. Now, to actually get the correct position of these, we need to think about the internal cube space, which is 0.282 by 0.282 by 0.293. So let's just add a cube. 0.282, 0.293, 0.282. Apply rotation and scale. 1. Move that up. Let's snap it down. GZ there. GX there. So that's what we're playing with. And now we need to array that to get in its correct position. And so I'll just add an array modifier. I don't want relative, I want constant. And on the X we want it to be 0.282, and then we want to add 0.015 to that, so plus 0.015. And then we want to duplicate that, but in the duplicate we do a Control C over there, set that to 0, and do Control V there. And there's our spacers for the box, and again we'll call that inner sizer, so we know what we're playing with, and again make it a wire. So that gives us all the dimensions we need. And you can also, with your sizes, choose deselect so you can't accidentally click on them. So I'm going to take this thing, Shift DZ, move it up like that. Then we're going to take it, this one, Shift DX. Now we're going to move that up, GZ, so it's not intersecting, and I'm going to select that face, GZ, move that down. And we're going to Shift DZ, and there we have it. There's our, hide those sizes, there's our basic structure. And what you can do then, because again we're talking about real world here, is you can add a bevel. Add bevel. Now, given the size it is, I would go for a 0.5mm bevel. Then Control I to invert, then Shift select that, Control L, copy modifiers. And if we go into subject, you can see that's very realistic now. It's all lines up. And if you want to add the doors, another thing you wouldn't do, the temptation is to make it fit that space exactly, but of course a real door wouldn't. So what you can do is you can select those two, go into edit mode, EX and snap to there, then separate that face by selection, and again you could solidify that, add a modifier, solidify, move it before the bevel, make that 0.015, the other way around, and then just apply that, Control A. I'll just check my face orientation. Everything's good. So you would say, well, that's alright. Well, it isn't, because again the door would be a fraction smaller than that. So I would tend to take 2mm off both that, so it would be 0.28, and X would be 0.281, and then just move it along a millimeter. So GX 0.001, GZ 0.001, and then you just copy that door down there. So again you do the same, Shift D, G, snap it down there, GZ 0.001, GX 0.001, and that puts them in a nice position. GX minus 0.0005, I think that looks a bit better. In fact, I'll repeat that. It looks like it was okay where it was. Now the back is just a simple plane. So again, we know it's going to be plywood on these things, or even hardboard, so we will add a mesh, add a cube, and again we know it's what did we say? Let's just check. We said it is 61, right, so 0.61, my 0.61, and we know by and large 2mm is probably as thick as you're going to get hardboard. So just G, snap it up to there, and then GY 0.002, right, and again add a bevel. This one probably 0.25 of a millimeter would be enough, because it's really thin wood. And that you can probably get away with just UVing from here, because it's so thin. I would just project from view for that you're not really going to see the sides. And again, I'll give it the wood material. Let's have a look. So there's just a couple of issues we need to address here, and the doors, because they weren't built from these, and the same with the back, there's going to have to be some tweaking of the wood. And so it's up to you then whether you just want to make it look different, or set it up the same way. Now and again the scale is wrong on these, so rotation and scale. Make sure everything's as it should be. So I'm just going to select these three and shift hide everything else. Go into here, and I'm picking my seams based on there we go. And I'm just going to UV editing, and again with that one, let's go into view. You can scale it, and you might want to rotate it, give it a different look. It's entirely up to you. And then do the same with that. I'll live with that. The back, I'll probably just scale that up to fit. Unhide everything. And there you go. And the advantage of doing your UV in first is, as you can see, all the planks are going in what would be a more logical way. And then you just got to add your handles. Again, this is Q-Block is great for this. I can go to here and add a circle cylinder, hold shift, and then just drag it out. Scale, shift Y. Again, apply rotation and scale. Something I often do is, if you accidentally created like this, actually they're not the same size, so Control C, Control V, there we go, that's better. Now apply the scale. With this, I really wanted more options in terms of geometry, so I'll take those two, select those two edges and subdivide it and do it twice. Then select those two again, go to loop tools and circle, and you get a much cleaner one. We'll give this one door handle, make it metallic, and we'll take the roughness down to about there, take the colour down to about there, and then we'll just add some detail. I'm going to scale Shift X, Shift Y rather. I want it a bit thinner than that at one end, because I want to scale that one up like that. Then I'm going to Control B to bevel that, just to give it a thing. Then I'm going to go to select loops, boundary loop, and then I'm going to Control E, and I'm just going to mark them sharp. Local mode, select that, and I'm going to mark that sharp as well. And actually I'd probably be inclined to put a tiny bevel on that. There's our door handle, and just Shift D, move that down there for the second door handle. So there's your 4 block, and if I pull up the work zone, what I'll probably do there, actually, first select that, Control I, select that, Control P, an object, and that way I could move everything. I mean, at that point, if you wanted, you could add in, make it all one object, but I don't, for the simple reason I then added hinges and made it so that I could open and close in case because again, thinking of realism in your scene, if you've got one item like that, and I'll just duplicate that hierarchy, Shift DX, like that, and you can have the door open, and you can show something inside. You could even have that slightly ajar if you wanted. It's not closed properly, but it just a tiny thing. Now you can see on my older model I've not got the UV in exactly right, as opposed to this new one where it's much tidier. So to do that, you basically just go in, and I would select that edge, and again Shift S, origin to selection using snapping pies, and then I could just RZ. Now one thing there, select that, make that the parent, do the same here. Oh, didn't like that. That's where you then need to use keep transform. So select that, Control P, keep transform. So whenever you have something like that where the parent doesn't work the way you think it should. So there you go. As you see here now, the UV mapping on that is much more like. So that's that. Again, you do exactly the same process with this. Take the measurements, add in the boards bit by bit. Do that a few times with really basic things, like one of the next things I've got is a filing cabinet, bedside table, TV unit, all of those things. Go through that, get it right, and that will then give you the confidence to move on to other objects. I mean, I'm currently in the process of building my living room, and so even things like vases and that. Let's see. So let's just go. So we go to house textures. So as you can see here, I'll switch to that, and I actually want house reference. Just bear with me. Here we go. As you can see, I've got a ton of reference for the various things in the house. You know, even something as simple as that. So again, you just use that. The obvious thing is to use a spline, or you could use just a simple RX. Just do this quickly, scale this in. You could use it using this. Just start with this, go in. I'd probably switch to wireframe for this, merge that at the center, and EX. Then I'll use Control and that right click and just roughly shape what I want, like that. And again there, I'll do a Shift S, origin to selection, and then you can just add in a screw modifier, like that. Then you can add in a solidify modifier, and then you can add in a subdivision, and then you just tweak accordingly. And in fact, before the solidify, you can even add a weld. Just move this up, toggle the stack. That gets rid of that possible hole at the bottom when you've got the UV on. And then if you just want to add things, you can just do the Control Shift B. No, it's not liking that. Let's just check those normals, just bear with me. No, normals are right. So, anyway, we'll select that, do a subdivide. GG. Select that, do a subdivide. GG. And the same at the top here. Subdivide 1. GG. In fact, just there we go. Then you can just bump your solidifier up. Vase. So things like that, just go through doing all those sort of processes, build yourself up a little library of items. By the time you've done that, you're ready to tackle bigger things. In terms of ArchViz, I'll put a link in the description. The Architecture Topics YouTube channel is a brilliant channel. I follow it religiously. So that would be something to follow if you're actually into ArchViz anyway. But this is just an easy way to get into modelling, and I hope this was useful to some people.